You're listening to Redesigning Reality with Dylan Charles and Jeff Anthony.
It gives you this countdown when you start recording. It goes 3, 2, 1. Still 1. And still okay now.
Okay, now here we go. This is the Redesigning Reality podcast. Dylan Charles here, talking as always with the one and only Jeff Anthony. What's up, Jeff?
Well, not the one and only. Sometimes I look at the phone book, or you're online, you like Google Jeff Anthony, and there's like 10 million Jeff Anthonys, and you're like, well, I'm not as original as I thought I was. But I am the only Jeff Anthony on Redesigning Reality, so there we go.
Seriously though, man, what's in a name? Just a name. Just some phonetic sounds.
True. Unless, people misspell your name, which was also that. Speaking of funny story, Costa Rica, I'd always meet all these Tico guys, that's what they call Costa Ricans, Ticos. And they'd be like, what's your name? And I'd be like, Jeff. And they'd be like, Yef? And I'd be like, no, Jeff. And they'd be like, Yef? And I'd be like, no, Jeff. And then I'd be like, okay, how about Jeffrey? And they'd be like, oh, Jeffrey. And I'm like, how come you could say a J when there's a R-E-Y on the end of my name, but you can't say a J when it's J-E-F-F? Anyway, funny.
My Costa Rican name is Dylan.
Yeah. Aaron was Erin. It's cute, Like we have a Tika friend, our best friend down there. Her name's Irene, but they say Irene, which is really pretty, and Irene's like, meh.
You gotta go with the flow.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about here. Flowing.
I had a good friend there, and he would always say Costa Rica. Been there for like 25 years and still says Costa Rica.
Canadian. Yeah, all the Canadians in my village said Costa Rica too. I was like, well, I guess it does. It is kind of costly to be here, but I call it Costa Rica. But whatever you like.
Canadians.
Isn't it funny, dude? We have all this, similarities in our lives. It's really funny how you said the funny thing, and I didn't live there, and I don't know who you're talking about, but I knew they're Canadian because the Canadians did the same thing where I was from. Eh?
And in today's episodes, we'll be bashing Canadians.
Oh, man, my cousin lived in Canada for 35 years, and my aunt, I loved it because he'd always come down and be like, hey, hey, that's cool, eh? And I always thought it was so neat, as a kid, because he talked funny. He lived in Quebec or whatever. So,
man, I'm actually hoping to do some work here in the next few years in Canada. Like, in Canada, they're suffering from the same opioid crisis, that we're going through here. So many addicts, people that are hooked on, street heroin, but mostly pills, pharmaceutical pills, fentanyl, OxyContin. The problems they're having up there with addiction and people dying from addiction overdosing are just as bad, if not worse, in some areas in Canada as they are in the United States. Super huge epidemic. I think in the U.S. there's something like 50,000 people a year dying from overdoses of opioid, synthetic opioids and opioid drugs.
Yeah,
just fucking insane.
It is insane. There's more people dying now from prescription drugs than illicit drugs, which is
it's crazy.
The powers that be and the media, they don't want you knowing all that, Yeah,
I actually wrote an article about that yesterday regarding it was on the real reason. It was basically about like the real reason why Big Pharma would want to seek to patent and control the cannabis market. Because just in Colorado this week, they found out that, some study revealed that for the first time in like 10 years, opioid deaths actually went in decline, like as in the number of deaths are not rising anymore as soon as they legalized cannabis, because people are able to switch, especially when you understand like the pipeline of how people get hooked on these drugs. It's it used to be, you know, you had Nancy Reagan out there telling everybody just to say no. And they had all these public service announcements out there with kids coming home from school, walking by the basketball courts, and, you know, sleazy drug dealer guys saying things like, "Yeah, you like flying, kid? I got something that'll really get you high." You know, this model of street drugs taking over. But the reality is that it's top down. It's corporate now. The pipeline is, you go to your doctor, you sprain your ankle, you have a car accident, you fall off your bike, or you hurt your back working out or whatever it is, and you go to your doctor.
Right.
And you end up, I think it's a 1 week supply. If you give a room of people a 1 week supply of OxyContin or other opioid pharmaceutical pills, within 1 week's time, half of those people will be physically addicted. You know, like these medicines are so addictive. So the pipeline is now, go to your doctor for help with pain. They give you some, you know, 1 or 2 runs of this medication. Once you're off that, you're kind of shit out of luck, and then you have to find your own. So people go down. They used to go down to these pill mills in Florida and stuff to score pills, or go to other states where you could get them. Buy pills on the street, buy pills online, and when you can't get those, you find out that, holy crap, it's easier and cheaper to get actual heroin. And so the overdose problem is insane, but it's really bad in Canada. And I'm really hoping to work in Canada in the next few years with a friend of mine, Gary Cook. He works with the plant medicine Iboga, which for some reason we don't really understand why, but it seems to interrupt the physical addiction process, the withdrawal process of opioid medications. It's extremely powerful. So like if an addict takes that medication while they're coming down, while they're in withdrawals, they can literally stop the withdrawals and survive the withdrawals within a day or 2 or 3 days or something like that. And from then on, they can use that same medicine to take a spiritual journey to uncover the actual roots of the addiction, to uncover why their spirit is craving this substance to cover up whatever it is in their lives. And so what I've heard through a few people is that Canada is actually finding out that if Canada is finally kind of coming around in some parts to accepting the fact that this medicine Iboga actually works and it helps people. So they're looking at it from a human interest perspective and seeing it as a possible way to help people off these medications. And so in that, there's a couple clinics where my friend Gary has worked at, where they're actually working sort of hand in hand with the government. And the government's allowing them to administer this otherwise psychedelic, deeply hallucinogenic medicine to people in order to help them recover from opioid addiction. And so we're thinking that within the next few years, it'll become more broadly accepted legally in Canada, and we can get up there and actually use it to help people.
I like how you keep referring to Iboga as a medicine too. I think a lot of people get, you know, things get misconstrued and popularized by, you know, the counterculture as a way to trip out or, you know, have a good time. And I think ayahuasca and Iboga have those two things, especially people refer to them as drugs a lot. And I agree with you. And I even more so because, as you're saying, like that there's this ability that it has to interrupt the withdrawal process and the sickness that people encounter while they're going through withdrawal. It absolutely happens because it is a medicine and it has a magical quality, for lack of a better term or word. You know, it really does, and it does amazing things for people. And I've seen a lot of info about Canada, especially like British Columbia and Vancouver, how the heroin usage had gotten so bad, and there was so many people with HIV there because of sharing needles and all that, that they started opening methadone clinics and even heroin clinics where they were allowing their addicts to come in and providing them with clean needles and heroin in order to keep it off the street and just cut down on the amount of HIV and stuff going on. That's insane. That's such an epidemic.
You have two schools of thought, two philosophies at work here in the so-called war on drugs. You have the war side of it. You know, this is a war. We're going to stomp it out. We're going to control and destroy, search and destroy, right? And then you have the harm reduction side of it. it's pretty clear that the war mentality, waging war on this kind of stuff, doesn't work. You can't lock people away. You can't stop this by locking people away. You can't stop this by SWAT teaming people's houses. You can't stop this by, flashbanging, homes and suburban homes. It's not going to happen. Like this problem isn't going to come to an end with brute force and this, controlling mentality. And so what else are we left with? We're left with harm reduction, right? Methadone's a fucked up thing too, man. Like if you've ever known really serious addicts, I mean, methadone is just another form of addiction. You have to have the methadone, and it's regulated. I don't know the exact details in the States, but it's regulated in such a way where you have to have access to the methadone clinics. But like literally you have to get up in the morning and go to the methadone clinic to get your methadone. It's not a solution to the problem. It's a way of alleviating the symptoms so that a person is able basically to go to work and pay taxes.
Right. A little more functional. Exactly.
Somewhat more functional, and that doesn't mean that it isn't doing some good in some places, but there's ways that we can actually get people off of these especially opioids. I mean, drugs overall are a problem. Drug addiction is a problem, but opioids are especially deadly. They're especially harmful, especially right now.
And highly addictive. I mean, that's the thing.
Ridiculously addictive.
I've been there. I think, I don't know if we've ever covered this on the podcast, but I've been addicted to opioids. I wrote about it in my book. And, my doctors gave me a hard time when I told them I had stopped taking my Vicodin that they were prescribing me. And, just a funny story is, you remember a time when people actually tried to help you, like doctors tried to send you to physical therapy or, maybe recommended that you have this non-invasive surgery, to try to fix your ankle or your knee or whatever, your shoulder, whatever you're having an issue with. And now they just try to cover up the thing with pain medication. And, Louis C.K., he had this funny bit that he did where he said, he jogs and he tries to stay in shape and his ankle started bothering him. And he said he went to the doctor and was like, yeah, my ankle's bothering me. And the doctor was like, so what's your date of birth again? And yeah, so you're like 43 years old. Like you're just old. It's worn out. That's just how it is now. You're fucked, basically. That's just how it is. And, like, hey, he's like, you can't do anything for me? Like, there's no therapy? No, that's what you do. You get up in the morning and you got this shitty ankle. You're just shitty now. So anyway, it was a funny bit, but it is like that now. There's this, there's no preventative medicine anymore. It's just medicine. They're not trying to prevent you from being on opioids. They're trying to throw them at you. And physical therapy and all these other outlets like acupuncture and acupressure and chiropractic and all these things have been marginalized. People try to make it sound like it's some, that's some alternative thing that doesn't work. And it absolutely does work. But it's easier to get people addicted to opioids and, keep fueling the system.
Yeah, I mean, that's the conspiratorial view, right?
Well, and it's also it's a realistic view as well. I mean, I'm not trying to be a conspiratorial person necessarily. It's an observation,
Man, you know what I'd really like to do with my life if some of this stuff was legal? I was thinking about this the other day. I would open a psilocybin clinic here in the United States.
Dude, I was going to tell you, I just read this week California is going to put psilocybin on the ballot because they've already, legalized marijuana and all that. They are serious, and it's going to be on their ballot. I want to say in the 2018.
Oregon's doing the same. Oregon's doing the same thing, and it's like they're shooting for the 2020 time frame.
And it's for mental health, for people with psychosis.
The model would be that I've read. The model would be that you basically would be allowed to be sanctioned by the state in some way to open up a clinic. So some regulatory process in place, which that stuff really pisses me off. And having the government then come in and be like, oh, okay, well now that now we get to regulate everything. That's a whole other argument. It's a whole other conversation. And that's happening right now with cannabis. Like the way they're doing cannabis in Nevada is it's fucked up. It's not really legalization, even though they call it legalization. But regarding psilocybin clinics, it would be some sort of license or some sort of regulatory approval that somebody gets to run this clinic, and they would probably have to have some sort of background in psychotherapy and adding all these other kind of certifications and stuff to it. And so the idea was that you could actually go do psilocybin at these specific clinics. So it's not legalization where if you had some mushrooms and you ate them, you didn't get in trouble for it, but you could actually go to these clinics and they would provide the setting and the psychotherapy and the aftercare and this whole scene, which take it for what it is. It's progress. You could say it's progress. My political views tend to lead more towards anti-statist, more towards libertarian views. I mean, if something doesn't need to be regulated, should it be regulated?
It's fascism.
It's fascism. But I would love to work with these kind of medicines, because what we're finding out nowadays is things like Iboga help opioid addicts, right? Iboga helps opioid addicts. Ayahuasca can be very powerful for, we've talked about this last week a little bit, of, for lack of better words, helping people through demonic possession, in a major sense, like allowing people to cast out from themselves these entities, these forces, these spiritual illnesses or spiritual beings that live inside of them that they don't understand, they don't need anymore, right? That's pretty powerful for that. And then there's the level of, it helps to inspire people, wake them up, develop a sort of a nature consciousness, allows them to, in a lot of cases, overcome depression. It really allows people to facilitate their own healings for things like cancer, ulcers, different things like this, because it allows them to see pathways to how their own mind works, to allow them to get in and actually do the healing work on themselves that they need to do. It's like Dr. Bruce Lipton. I was listening to one of his recent interviews recently, and he's still, his message, the science of belief,
the biology of belief.
The biology of belief. Mm-hmm. You have genetics, which is the idea that you're a victim of your genetics, like you're born a certain way and you're destined to live out, the results of your genetic whatever makeup. So
mapping, right.
Yeah. And then there's epigenetics, the idea that you can function, your mind, your consciousness can actually function on a level higher than genetics and can control what happens to your genetics. So, oh wow, all of a sudden you're not a victim to genetics, a totally different mindset. But in Bruce Lipton, just listening to how the mind creates the healing conditions, the belief systems create the healing conditions. Now, this is something that when you get into belief systems and how they work to improve your life or put up obstacles in your life, there's so many sages and channelers and so many people that explore that idea that your belief systems, your core beliefs, however they get instilled in you, whether it's from your parents, whether it's from your upbringing, whether it's from experiences that you've had, when you develop belief systems, those belief systems tend to design the reality that, they design the parameters, the boundaries of your reality. And so dealing with these
to further, extrapolate more information and expand upon the Bruce Lipton thing, he was saying how all cancer begins in the mind, right?
I believe that.
And it's because of your thought process, of what you're concentrating on. And there was a German doctor, who he got shut down in Germany and he started practicing in Spain. I can't remember his name right now, but he had done so much research that he could tell you based on what your issue was. So, for example, women who develop breast cancer, he had figured out that they had an issue with their mothers, right? And he started to map in what parts of the mind you have these different cognizant thoughts, and he could tell by what type of cancer, like pancreatic or breast cancer or lymphatic cancer, and he could tell people what had been their issue, and then he would send them to psychotherapy, and he was curing people of cancer with psychotherapy. It was like, it's an insane I'll have to look it up and maybe we could talk about it again in more detail. But it's really interesting that, cancer, like Bruce Lipton was saying, that you're not born with cancer cells in your body. It's something that develops, and it develops through your mind, and cancerous thinking.
And literally every single day that you're alive, your body, billions and trillions of cells die off, and billions of trillions of cells are created. So the mind has
what do they say? Every 7 years, you're a completely new everything. Your bone marrow, every cell in your body is completely replaced every 7 years.
So you have so backing up a bit, you have medicines like Iboga, like they work with opioid addicts, but they're also powerful spirit. They present powerful spiritual journeys that allow you to explore and uncover the roots of things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, fear, addiction, all kind of stuff. Then you have things like psilocybin, which the more research that comes out, and all this stuff was kind of introduced into public consciousness in the in the 60s and the hippie movement and stuff, but we've grown up a lot since then. And things like psilocybin now, the reason why it's on the ballot or going to be on the ballot in California and Oregon and stuff is because it works. It works. Single doses of psilocybin can actually rewire, physically change parts of the brain that provide these compensation activities for depression and anxiety and such. And so you can, with the right setting, with the right level of care, you can actually go in and prevent someone from a lifelong addiction to antidepressants, right?
Right.
And so, like I was saying, I wrote this article the other day about the real reason why the pharmaceutical companies would want to patent cannabis in its forms, and it's not just because it's extremely lucrative. I mean, Colorado alone, they sold $1 billion worth of cannabis this year just from in the first 10 months of the year, right? That's a lot. That's a big market, and that's just one out of potentially 50 states, right? 50 markets, right? But there's a lot of money to be made, but more importantly, there's a lot of money to be lost, and there's a lot of market share to be lost. I think it was another study came out where they found out that half of people who had tried CBDs, and these are cannabidiols, these are medicines made from a part of cannabis or hemp plants. You don't even have to use the psychoactive cannabis plant. You can use the hemp plant to extract CBDs. Half of the people who tried these CBDs for various things, mostly for pain, management of chronic inflammation, this sort of thing, over half of them quit taking prescription and over-the-counter medicines. So it's not just about making money, it's about losing money, and it's about losing influence, and it's about losing control. It's about losing, basically not having people come to your medicine counter first. And it's a big fucking deal.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is, here we are in Oregon, right? Or here I am in Oregon. And as you're driving around on the highways and byways of Oregon, there's all these signs. They're just big black billboards with white text. And it's talking about how there's we have this medical crisis going on here where, they're trying to rework Obamacare and they're trying to get rid of Social Security, and they blame it on, the baby boomers and the elderly, and we have this crisis and we can't afford it. And then they have all these billboards here that say, basically, if cannabis was legalized nationwide in the United States, the Social Security and like Medicaid system would have saved over $1 billion last year alone. In 1 year, $1 billion. The first year and that's on a savings. That's not the revenue that they're going to make from taxation of cannabis. That's just the savings of people using cannabis as an alternative to all the opioids and things that we're talking about. So, but there's too much vested interest in control, like you said, in profits, in the pharmaceutical and medical system that we have going here.
I have a friend in Costa Rica. She's the wife of a friend of mine, but she's my friend as well. She's had like a chronic stomach illness, kind of an ulcery kind of thing, but they don't really know what it is. So it hasn't been fully diagnosed, but it's been bothering her for years now, and it's this chronic stomach pain, and it's been really, really messing up her life. And she ended up with some cannabis oil, butane hash oil, right? Really strong stuff. You can smoke it, you can eat it, whatever. And she one day decided, she had it sitting around for a year or something, and one day decided that maybe it would make her feel better. So she, without any supervision, she took a spoonful or whatever, like a whole bunch basically. She took the, double heroic dose.
Yeah, hero dose.
like the double heroic dose of hash oil. And so cannabis alone, this medicine sent her into a psychedelic trip, an introspective journey. She was laying on the couch, and her husband said that she was watching her, and she was like, wow, she was saying this crazy stuff about how, like, oh, I'm a teacup, I'm going to pour myself into myself, and all this cosmic stuff. But she had, talking to her afterwards, I talked to her, and she had basically an out-of-body experience where she left her body, and then from the perspective of being out of her body, went back into her body to look at it from a different vantage point, and was able to see things that were in there fucking up her stomach and this and that. And since that experience, she's been feeling really, really well. This is something that's bothered her for years and years and years. And so you're talking about, once again, that psychedelic experience, this time generated by cannabis, which is pretty exciting, really, if you think about it. But that's the same experience that's triggered psilocybin, ayahuasca, Iboga. I mean, they're all different, but the idea that the consciousness takes a journey, right? Normal consciousness, day-to-day contemporary consciousness takes a break. Something major shift happens, and the mind is allowed to venture off into parts unknown and come back with really helpful, useful information in a lot of cases. But they're finding out, like, ketamine, which is, it's popularly known as a horse tranquilizer, like this kind of thing, like the therapeutic effects of that in depression and PSD and stuff are super powerful. So you're looking at a whole array of things that are illegal, but they're quick fixes to some of our greatest societal problems.
Right.
So it's cool to see the tides turning and things are changing. But this is why people keep talking about these kind of medicines, because there's a lot of healing that can be that is offered by this stuff. And man, this society, it's fucking healing, bro.
Absolutely. And I've had that same experience. I with psilocybin and also a little aid of maybe a little bit of LSD in there. I was trying to, I was about to move to the States, and I had a bunch of leftover psilocybin and LSD laying around. So I thought I would, I see you smiling and laughing. I thought I would, do the mega hero dose and maybe get rid of all of it in one night. So I chose to do that in the food hole. I stuck it all in my mouth, and then I thought, I don't know, this is, an hour went by, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. So I stuck a little more in there. And before I knew it, I was on the couch having this out of body experience where, long story short, I had to literally, put the pieces of myself back together again. And I remember having the conscious thought that, wouldn't it be cool and interesting if I could reassimilate myself in a way that I no longer had any physical disabilities, right? And that's a thought I never had consciously had without the use of psilocybin. And it was one of those moments where you have this revelation and you realize that a lot of what we're doing as far as illness or dis-ease, as they call it in the circles that you and I frequent, disease is a dis-ease in the body. And if you can remove the dis-ease, then you can heal the body. And I was really concentrating on that and thinking about how could I reassimilate myself to cure this physical illness and this dis-ease in my body. Obviously, I wasn't successful in the first go at it, but I can tell you that the reason that I got to that level of thought is because I was so out of my reality. I was in such an other than normal reality that my mind was free to. I was completely free. I remember laying on the couch at one point, and I was like, "Man, my neck hurts really bad because of this position that I'm in on this pillow." And I bet you I could just think about it and not really move my head, and I could make it stop hurting. And it happened. And over again, I had these thoughts of, this discomfort in my body. I wonder if I can just think about it and fix it. And I kept doing it. And then that was when I started trying to do the reassimilation thing, the redesigning of my personal reality. And I feel like that it's something like you're talking about, in the right set and setting with the right guidance and another big dose and another big dose through repeated exercise, because it would be an exercise. It would be the kind of thing that you could accomplish, but societally we've shunned these things or fringed them out so far and say there's no use for these things. It's just a party drug, like the ketamine and K-Holin and all that stuff. I just watched the same thing, I think, that you're talking about, of this guy with severe PTSD, and he couldn't hold down a job and all this stuff. And he's one of the, guinea pigs, for lack of a better word, in this study. And I think he said, wasn't it like the first or second time that he did it, he his anxiety and all this stuff started dropping off big time. It was really interesting.
It takes a lot of courage to take these medicines, a whole lot of courage. I think that's a big part of the healing factor of it, because especially if you look at something as serious as like a proper ayahuasca ceremony, it takes a lot of courage to drink and then to drink again. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're going to have to face. And so in that space, arriving at that space with the courage to confront every part of yourself, regardless of what may happen, I think is a big part of the healing aspect of these medicines. You mentioned actually coming apart and falling apart. I remember reading, it might have been Joseph Campbell talking about like the shamanic archetypes or something I've read back in the day, but he talks about how shamanic healers from around the globe, because, the history of the planet was we had these indigenous societies on all the continents, around the globe, and these societies, they all had some form of healers in their societies, right? In some cases, they perhaps maybe took psychedelic medicines, in the jungles, maybe they were taking ayahuasca, maybe they were taking some kind of mushrooms, or the burning bush, whatever they were taking in the Middle East, right? Or just doing like these other techniques, like the shamanic drumming, the transcending ordinary consciousness through repetitive, much like transcendental meditation works, through repetitive thought pattern processes or what have you. But I think it was Campbell, but he talks about how like what the commonality between the anthropological study of all these societies was that the shaman became a shaman. He became healer, like his healing powers, his powers to work on other people were actually unfolded, were realized after he went through an experience so deep that his body and his mind and everything completely came apart, was completely torn apart. Even Terence McKenna, I believe, talks about this quite a bit.
I was going to say, I think I think what you're referring to is Terence McKenna.
Well, I think a lot of people have looked into this, but it's the process of
overlap. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's the process of becoming a shaman, like the total disintegration of the self, arriving at that experience with the courage to make it through that experience, witnessing the total disintegration of the self. And in some experience, it was more shocking and terrifying or scary than it was in other modalities. But the point being was that these people had seen themselves become totally taken apart, totally disintegrated. Watch themselves, or were able to pull themselves. That the Terminator 2 comes to mind when the bad Terminator gets blasted to bits, and you're looking at him on the floor, and then he pulls himself right back together and gets back to work. But yeah, pull yourself back together, recompose yourself through these experience. For the outsider, you're looking at just a person laying there in a hammock perhaps all night, or a person chanting or singing ikaros or doing something all night. But what's happening inside the psyche, the realms that open up with these processes, are unbelievable. So for a person to become a healer, first of all, they have to be able to heal themselves, and that's the landmark moment, is when they fully disintegrate and somehow pull it back together.
Right. And I've fortunately for myself, I've been through a lot of that, and a lot of it came through being a young guy, and it came through recreation and things that people would think were childish or, immature, because I was in this rave culture. I was a DJ, and I would take large amounts of LSD because it was fun. And it was really funny, though, because when the party was over, when the music stopped, you go home and you're still tripping and you're there with your mind. And that's where a lot of my introspective thought and the process of blowing my reality so far out that I had to reassimilate myself started. And I'll be totally honest. I mean, a lot of the reason I did a lot of that at that time was because I was frustrated. I was angry with the diagnosis I had been given and the reality of the life I was in. And so it was more fun to get out of that reality. But through this process of escapism and trying to have fun and alter my reality, some of the most beneficial things happened. And I think we talked about this some on the last show, being an intuitive and being such an empath. These things have a much more impact upon you, and it's really easy for me to let go, and let the spirit of psilocybin, the spirit of ayahuasca, the spirit that's behind even LSD to kind of take me on a trip, take me on a journey, show me things that I could do, and then bring back that knowledge and information to help other people that aren't as interested in, taking the double hero dose and exploring, other than normal reality. And it's been those things have been some of the greatest experiences of my life. And it's not like it's something that I'm addicted to or that you are, that we want to have to do ayahuasca this weekend, or I really want to do a bunch of acid again. It's just when the opportunities present themselves and the timing is right, and you feel that tug, you're like, hey, man, this could be a really beneficial thing for me right now. This could help me. And beyond helping me, this is going to help my family. This is going to help my friends, because I'm going to come back a different person. And you can speak to that about, I've witnessed it. Yeah, I've watched you become a different person from all the different ayahuasca journeys that you've done. I remember an angry, frustrated, out of sorts Dylan. And man,
True
like
that.
you're a totally different person,
Totally, yeah. Back to the idea of harm reduction. Not only is there a need for us to treat addicts or addiction in general in a different way, but when I was young, when I was 16, 17, 18, really 19 years old, that's when I started to get into, again, rave culture, drug culture, this and that, and there was nothing. There's nothing out there that says to young people, hey, guess what? You're in a society where there's drugs. Drugs are available in your society. They may or may not be legal, but they're out there. There is a right way and a wrong way to do drugs. We were talking in the last episode about spiritual illness and, like demonic possession and stuff. I really feel like a lot of that comes from the misuse of drugs, the misuse of drugs in our society. I mean, you have this huge rave cultures where people go out and totally crack themselves open with all these substances in the search for having a good time. And then they're spiritually wide open in these environments where there's a lot of people there with a lot of different motives and a lot of different levels of experience in the world and a lot of different reasons for being there. And so to me, those are the dangerous situations. Those are the dangerous ways to use any of this kind of stuff. So to see this kind of on the ballot, psilocybin perhaps on the ballot, and think, oh, well, maybe you'll be able to go to a clinic. That's not for everybody. You should be allowed to just go pick a mushroom and sit in your house without the fear of cops coming and knocking on your door and journey in your own living room or whatever. But at the same time, there is no harm reduction going on at the point where young people are introduced to these kind of drugs. I have a good friend. He's a young guy. I met him when he was 17 years old, and I met him down in the jungle of Costa Rica at an ayahuasca event, and he was there. His parents brought him there with a friend of his because they were at their wits' end. His parents were wise, very conscious people, very well-to-do, and they had one son, and he was super involved in drug dealing out in California. A friend of his had just gotten murdered. He was, totally acting up in school, violent, was involved, in trouble with the law and everything. But otherwise, he should have been a good kid, very well-to-do family, whatever. Totally caught up in the American lifestyle, and it's essentially the same lifestyle I was caught up in when I was his age. But he came to ceremonies, and you're talking proper ayahuasca events led by proper elder shaman who've been doing this stuff for generations. Using extremely proper ceremonial protocols in a very well protected sacred space, very clear understanding of how to behave in these ceremonies, what to do, what you can and shouldn't do to get the most out of it. And his first ceremony, I love telling this story because it's just so cool. This young guy, 17, with all these problems, he takes like one dose of this medicine, and the shamans are leading the ceremony, and he goes into a trance, and all night long, he finds himself on a dragon flying through some other world, right? And for the rest of the night, 8-9 hours, he's literally flying around on the back of this dragon, doing battle with all these other dragons. And he's slaying all these evil dragons that keep coming to attack him and, casting fire on him and all this kind of stuff. And he's attacking them one-on-one and knocking them down and flying over this beautiful landscape or whatever. And so in the morning when the sun comes up, when he wakes up, I saw it in his face. Like we talked about this before. Somebody's face can totally change when something leaves them, when they conquer some demon inside of them. Their face, the physical appearance can actually change. In the morning, he wakes up with the sun and is like, wow, I'm a totally different person. And so I've known him. This has been 5 or 6 or so years, and we've kept in touch, and totally different. I mean, immediately was able to put down all of that lifestyle stuff. Immediately was able to get on a path that he needed to be on, follow his own dreams and pursuits. Super happy guy, doing lots of good in the world. Amazing. But it's a 17-year-old who's given access to this stuff by his parents. It's not something that everybody has access to. So, where does harm reduction really begin, right?
That's a great question. And and also, I mean, inside of that too is, something that I was addressing earlier this week at a community center that I was asked to come and speak at was, domestic violence and all this kind of stuff. I was never aware that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And one of the things that I mentioned there to them was, as a kid growing up, I'd never even heard the term domestic violence, and we're talking about self-care. We're talking about parental guidance. And a lot of people's domestic issues come from their parents. It starts at home. And, the interesting part of all of this is a lot of parents don't turn to alternative things or look for help because they feel like they have dominion over their children. Like, because they're my kids, they're supposed to do what I say and follow this way and do things the way that they've been going on in the United States for generations on end. And the interesting part of that is when you do come across parents that have the foresight or the insight, like this young man's parents did, to go and seek out something completely off their radar, right? It's so far, off the reservation that it's something they would have never considered before. But also, I mean, man, they understood they were at a point they're going to lose their son. Like the next drug deal could be the last drug deal. Right. That's the kind of situation that kid was in, and a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize that extreme situations call for extreme solutions in many, many cases. And that's the thing that I've always kind of, pursued in my personal life. And also when I'm counseling people, there's sometimes that I tell people, they're like, man, you weren't very nice. And you said some kind of things that hurt my feelings at first when I first met you. And I say to them, sometimes you got to shake people to help them. Sometimes you need to be shaken with love so that you can realize the thought pattern that you're trapped in and the ways of living and the belief system that you have that's, it's diseased. It's negative. And the only way to help certain people is to tell them, stop fucking talking to yourself like that, because people need to hear that sometimes, I know that that's been effective with me. In one of the chapters in my book, a shaman healer that I was working with kept asking me to do things that I physically couldn't do. And I kept saying, man, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he'd be like, stop fucking apologizing to me, man. You're not doing it. You haven't done anything wrong. All you say is, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. What are you fucking sorry for? And I remember having that same thought of, man, this guy's like F-bombing me like crazy. Like, what is going on here? And then after the fact, as I assimilated and processed and marinated on what I had been through, I realized he was exactly what I needed at the time. That the soft serve, the little, oh, it's okay, buddy, you're going to be fine. That wasn't going to work. I was way too far gone. I was angry, and I was frustrated, and I was at my wit's end, and I needed somebody to tell me, wake the fuck up and stop apologizing. You're being a victim when you do that. You're feeling sorry for yourself, and I just wish we could get to a place where more people would consider these alternative things that we keep talking about in these episodes and get away from, the Western medical system and the opioids and all the things that we've been talking about today that have been so detrimental. And so many parents have, taken their kids or other family members to the doctor to try to fix something. And then in the end, they lose a loved one, and then they have to live with that guilt.
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge industry being built up in the United States and in Canada around opioid addiction treatment. It's huge. I mean, billion dollar industry. I was reading something the other day about these top investors and stuff are looking at like, oh, there's some opportunity here. Let's see here. What can we get people? How many people can we get in the doors of this new facility? So in essence, in essence, kind of like a new type of prison complex, right? So I don't know. I mean, there's definitely places in the world where these things are legal, but generally the conversation needs to be had that it is possible for people to break through their belief systems with whatever use of substances or whatever, to break through their belief systems to heal themselves through all of the things that we typically run to the medical establishment for. And we've talked about this before. My experience with being prescribed antidepressants, if I hadn't had the courage and just if I hadn't been so shocked by what the doctor was trying to get me to do, so shocked that I just threw all the medications in the trash. I mean, who knows how many years would I've been taking, medications with fluoride and all this fluorhexamine and all this garbage and chemicals, putting all this shit into my body. Where would I be now? Would I be able to overcome the fear that I have every day of just being alive in this world? Would I be able to overcome the anxiety? Would I be able to overcome, all of that negativity to just be happy? Because really, that's really what happiness is really, I think, what people are seeking more than anything else. So I see like psychedelics and this whole movement. There's a process of maturation going on. Things are maturing. You have organizations like MAPS, the multidisciplinary psychedelic. I forget the acronym, but they've been doing research into cannabis and psilocybin and LSD and all this stuff for years. And slowly, we're convincing the technocratic boss governor to let us do these things, which have always been available for the most part, always been available to us in the past. So, but to become a healer means that you first have learned to heal yourself. At least is the way that I've come to see it, Mm-hmm. And so that doesn't fit in with the paradigm of modern, the American medical establishment. That doesn't fit into that paradigm. I don't even know if doctors would consider themselves healers, these days. I mean, more so perhaps purveyors of remedies, right?
Right.
Totally.
Or, cover. Yeah. The analogy I see is like, you get in an accident with your car and you take it to a body shop and they just smear a bunch of Bondo. They don't pull the dents out and make it and straighten it all up. They just smear a bunch of Bondo over it and paint it up and make it look pretty and send you back out on your way. Never mind that if you get in another accident, the car's going to come apart and you're going to die because it's not going to be structurally sound. We don't, people don't think about these things. Sometimes analogies paint a picture that help you to have a deeper understanding of, just covering up symptoms is what we're talking about. We're covering up symptoms with pills. And the other issue, though, is, man, society, not as a whole, but a large portion of society, of the masses, as they say, they want that one pill solution. Give me some pill that I can pop and make me feel better because my back hurts or they don't want to. We talked about this, I think, a little bit last time, change their diet and drop 20 pounds because their belly's pulling on their lower back. And you'd be amazed at, the differences that could happen in your life if you went to a chiropractor, if you lost a few pounds, if you changed your diet, if you stopped eating sugar, and stopped pounding alcohol. But people want to, have their cake and eat it too, as they say.
We don't live in an extremely empowering, self-empowering culture, right? I've even equated it, gone totally in the other extreme and called this a culture of death. We worship in a lot of ways death, the death of the spirit, the death of the body, and this is revealed. This is revealed to us in something as simple as our, what we choose as entertainment, right? Rambo, what's the body count in Rambo, right? Good times, that Rambo. But I think things are really changing right now. I think the culture is really evolving right now. Now that does not include the political aspects of this culture, but the culture is really evolving right now towards self-empowerment. And I see this a lot because I work in, for lack of a better word, alternative media. I've found a way to reach, hundreds of thousands, millions of people through a website that I manage and curate. That model wasn't available just 10 years ago. That form of communication, the ability to reach so many people, was monopolized by, the corporate media model that we've had for so long. So now that we have these new models for communication open up, how have people been using those models? I mean, look at the amount of empowering, awesome, inspiring content that's being put out in podcasts and blogs. I mean, people do Instagram things about food and health. I mean, there's so many people that are like, oh, wait, we get to be the media now too? Or we're going to stop pimping fear and shoving gun battles down people's throats. And we're going to get away from doing the crime dramas and the murder mysteries and the celebrity worship and all that bullshit. We're going to do stuff that's really cool and meaningful and makes people's lives better and makes them more powerful in their own lives on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's really like the gift of the forum that we have, especially with something like this podcast as well. So while you've seen those trends play out in your life, while you've seen those trends towards taking the pill, that sort of thing, I think all that's coming to an end. I think all that's changing right now. I think it's coming. I think it's crashing down. It's just.
Well, slowly, true. But then, like we read and like we talked about at the beginning of the show, the opioid epidemic, those are people shoving pills in their mouths and shooting stuff into their veins. I mean, that's. Well, man, listen. Sadly, that's the. I agree with you. I mean, we agree and we disagree. You know what I'm saying? Like, well, no,
hold on. I don't think we disagree. Hold on. Let me just say this. Like, that's. You and I've talked about this too, like personally, and I think perhaps even in this podcast, but the notion that, as an individual, you go through this moment in your life where things are so dark, so gloomy, is so close to doom, so close to suicide or knocking yourself off, like so close to giving up, that triggers that's the catalyst that actually triggers the desire, the want, the drive to pull yourself out of that, and so I see that on an individual, and so maybe that's part of what's happening as the collective, because without these pressures, without these negative pressures, people are, I think trend inherently towards complacency and stuff. So now you're seeing the opioid crisis, and that's forcing a government like Canada to be more acceptive of something psychedelic and this entheogenic, hallucinogenic medicine, which they, government, up till now has had no business looking at, no business doing anything but other than outlawing. And so cause and effect, little by little. I don't think we really disagree. I just see it as like, yeah, there's lots of symptoms, there's lots of warning signs that things need to change, and at the same time, things are changing. You know,
absolutely. I mean, again, I'm about to say I agree, but you know,
it's okay to agree.
But we've also been parts of different segments of society too. You know, my background of the military and being in the VA system and seeing, man, you want to talk about an opioid problem. You want to talk about like extreme opioid abuse. It's rampant at the VA, and it's rampant amongst veterans. You know,
what are you saying? What do you disagree with me on, though? Like,
Well, my disagreement is I mean, I agree that I see people waking up that there is a problem, but I still see a lot of people seeking out a one pill solution, seeking out the easy, you know, in their mind, cure it. It's not the cure. It doesn't cure anything. It only exacerbates the problem and creates other problems in their lives, such as, you know, domestic violence and addiction and homelessness. And, you know, one of the, you know, living here in Eugene, there's so many homeless people on the streets. And I mean, my heart goes out to a lot of these people. You know, I understand that a lot of them come from, you know, bad situations that they were trying to get out of, but then they hit the streets, and then a lot of them end up as addicts, you know, and a lot of them are on opioids. And I often question, you know, like I was talking to a drug counselor just the other day, and she said, the sad thing is a lot of these people, you know, these street kids are just here because they're trying to get out of going to prison, or they're trying to get out of a court date or something, because they have, you know, this counselor meeting that they have to go to for their, and she said, as soon as they leave here, they're just trying to score some drugs, you know, and you know that their heart's not in it. They're just here because it's court ordered, or it's, you know, something, and it's because they're caught in a cycle, you know, and they're in a system where something is readily available, and they're hurt, you know, and, you know, we've talked about this before. Hurt people continue to hurt people, and usually the person they hurt the most is themselves. And I don't know. I'm looking for. I agree with you that the tide is turning. I agree with you that people are aware that, man, we have major problems here in this country and all over the world with drug addiction and opioids. But, you know, there comes a point where collectively, as, you know, as the end users, you know, one of the issues I had the other night when I was at this forum about domestic violence was all the people there are the educated people that run the centers and are trying to inspire change. There weren't abused people there that were, or the abusers weren't there trying to change the world. It's all the people that already understand that this is a horrible thing that we shouldn't be doing to people. And so how do we get the common person, you know, on the ground, the boots on the ground, as they say in the military? How do we get those people to take up, you know, the mantle of getting off the opioids and stopping the homelessness and the abuse and all that, you know?
Yeah. You're participating in this for a reason. Like, you're doing exactly what you're doing for a reason. So, you know, it's easy to look at and be like, okay, there's two sides. The universe is light and dark, good and bad. You know, it's dichotomous, right? And you say all this stuff, but here you are in a podcast, my friend, doing what you're doing for a reason. And the reason is like what I was saying earlier, like you're participating in this movement of empowerment, of healing. It's an individual process, and then that expands. It's a communal process, and then it's a planetary process. And we got a long fucking way to go. And I think that may be what you're trying to articulate, is that we have a long road ahead of us. But nevertheless, you're digging your heels in as a mind. You're doing this work. You talk about these addicts and, you know, how they want to get this done and that done so they can go out in the street and just to find another hit. Man, I've been there. You know, I've been there. Methamphetamines, party drugs, this and that. I've been there. I know what it's like to fiend for another hit.
Right.
You know, but I also know what it's like to be able to kick that shit out of your life and move on, and then find even like, very deep levels of inner peace and happiness and joy. And so here we are. I'm doing what I'm doing for the same reason that you're doing what you're doing.
Right. Because I realize that at some point, it's up to the individual. I have journeyed to inner sage for a reason, because I realize that it's the individual that has to make the choice. I can't convince someone who wants to do drugs to stop doing drugs. They have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And when they decide to become their own inner sage, when they become their hero, their healer, and go on that journey, then they'll solve their issue. And I agree with you. But things have changed dramatically in our own lifetimes,
At the same time, though, I know you're cognizant of the fact that what inspires people to make that decision, to be like, okay, I need to put this shit down, are these little signposts in life that they find along the way. And those signposts are typically information or experience. And that's why you're contributing the information that you're contributing right now, because you're saying that people, they won't be able to quit until they're ready to quit. But that perhaps if 100 people hear this message, this message that you're putting out is going to resonate with them a certain way. That's going to flip that switch or help them to flip that switch for themselves, man. Right. So it's important, man. We're living in an ecosystem of harm in a lot of ways, and I mean in so many ways. And I've heard other people talk about this recently. That's inspired me. And, framing it along the lines of that, if you know this stuff, if you feel the way that you feel, like the way that you and I, the way that we're talking, if you've been through this, you have an obligation to speak. You have the forums, you have the platforms now to put this stuff out there for people, because you're right. Not everything resonates with everybody, but everything resonates with somebody. And so if you know this stuff, if you've gone through this, if you can help, if you've helped yourself, if you've moved yourself from the victim to the healer, or to the self-healer, to the outward healer, then you have an obligation at this time, because things are so fucked up and so messed up that you have an obligation to pitch in your voice and let it be heard, man. So it's easy, man. It's easy to want to be like, this place is fucked, In a lot of ways it is. It's easy to want to be like, man, there's no hope, And I mean, you could have that conversation, but I know what it feels like to feel good about life. I know what it feels like to be excited about life, and I think it's a gift that everybody's entitled to, and I think it's something that everybody will eventually be open to, So it's part of what we're doing at this podcast. And heck, man, it's been an hour. We probably should wrap it up. But part of that's one of the main reasons we're doing this with this podcast, is sharing these ideas, reaching out to people, working on developing a community around this idea that we are our own masterminds of reality, right? Like, we control the reality that we live in. It begins here in the heart, So, man, let's keep it upful.
For sure.
What else you got to say, brother? I mean, it's been an interesting hour. It seems like we hit on this topic of plant medicines and stuff a lot. There's a lot to it. There's a lot more to it. But you got anything you want to say to wrap this one up, Jeff?
Well, just the onus is upon you, and things are getting better. I totally see that, and you have to stay hopeful. And you're absolutely right. I do what I do because I know I can use my story to help others. And, if there's 100 people and 90 people don't change, the 10 that do, that's all you need. I mean, you just impacted 10 lives, and those 10 lives will then impact maybe some of those 90 lives that you weren't able to touch because they have a different relationship with those people. And the message spreads from there, and I love doing this. I love society. I love humanity. And I'm just going to continue to do my part, and not be embarrassed. And that would be my message to anyone. Don't be embarrassed by your past or the things that you've done. Your story is my story is your story, kind of thing, and by sharing your experience, you can help many, many people.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff Anthony. This has been the Redesigning Reality podcast. It's a mastermind of personal transformation, if you will. Dylan Charles. You can check out some of my work at wakingtimes.com. And talking with Jeff Anthony, look up his book, Cosmic Wizard, A Journey from Outer Rage to Inner Sage, an awesome book about his personal story. And check us out, redesigningreality.com, on YouTube, all that good stuff. Thanks for tuning in.
Ciao.
Ciao. Peace.
You've been listening to Redesigning Reality with Jeff Anthony and Dylan Charles.
Mukabanya, mukabanya.